11:30 a.m., December 16th, 2010. While Western teenagers were being enlightened by their own intelligence while yelling at each other in Call of Duty lobbies.
Get off my face! I can't see!
A Tunisian street vendor by the name of Mohamed Bouazizi would set himself on fire after having his wares confiscated by government officials. Little did he, or the officials know at the time, that this would spark not only a region-wide protest movement, but also one of the first protest movements to utilize social media on a mass scale. This movement would be known as the Arab Spring. This spark, fueled by social media, would lead to the overthrow of the autocratic Tunisian government and the implementation of the Arab world's first full-fledged democracy. A rebirth of democracy that would spread across the Middle East, leading to a new age of enlightenment, peace, harmony, and scientific achievement. No, just kidding. With the exception of Tunisia, the Arab Spring would be a complete shit show. Unlike the new atheist movement, which was mostly relegated to social media with a minor offline presence, the Arab Spring involved social media as a method to organize protests IRL, or in real life. This had already been seen in the non-Arab Middle Eastern country of Iran in 2009, as Twitter was used to organize protests against what was seen as a rigged election. The fervor was not confined to Tunisia, as another North African nation, Egypt, would see its own dictator bite the dust. Hosni Mubarak was removed from power by the military due to massive protests organized via social media, and arrested for killing peaceful protesters, but he was eventually released. Egypt would have an election. Many in the West were ecstatic at the time. See how our technology would help people liberate themselves from oppression? And the Egyptian people liberated themselves from oppression by electing Islamic fundamentalist of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohamed Morsi. One of Morsi's most important digital achievements was banning online porn. The issue is that you can't have freedom without the freedom to goon. Morsi was eventually deposed by the military of Egypt, and Egypt eventually would merge into a democracy, sort of like the Denmark of the Middle East, thanks to social media. Oh, wait, sorry, let me just fact check this for a second. No, Egypt just kind of turned into a military dictatorship again. The transition to democracy in Tunisia and the massive rallies in Tahrir Square in Cairo were sources of optimism for the role social media plays in shaping the IRL world. However, with arguably the exception of Tunisia, most of these online and IRL social movements did not lead to democracies, but oftentimes to another rehash of authoritarianism, or even worse, anarchy. This transition from digital optimism to digital pessimism will be a recurring theme throughout this series.
We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget.
4chan was an English-language version of the Futuba channel, a Japanese image board. The Japanese version was mostly used to discuss lighthearted subjects and to share images of your favorite anime or favorite bowl of ramen noodles. Who cares about extremist ideologies when you have instant ramen and waifu pillows? However, unlike its Japanese mother channel, 4chan became more socially and ideologically charged. Well, at least on the boards that weren't centered around My Little Pony fandom. Hackers and trolls would use the internet image boards to organize pranks, most of which were lighthearted. Another major troll website at the time was Encyclopedia Dramatica, which was a parody of Wikipedia to mock figures on the website LiveJournal. Side note, LiveJournal was one of those early blog services that acted like a digital diary for other diary writers to read. LiveJournal became a massive hit in Russia and other former Soviet states, to the point when this initially American website would eventually become Russian-owned and operated, and thereby was under Russian censorship laws. Many gay rights activist bloggers left the platform due to Russia's, quote, gay propaganda law. The tension between the closed Russian model of the internet and the more open Western model of the internet will be a recurring phenomenon in later chapters of this series. Back to Encyclopedia Dramatica. The website's focus would shift away from live journal trolling into trolling internet culture in general, particularly on YouTube. Like 4chan, it became a hub for trolls and hackers, sometimes with a deep and meaningful cause, and sometimes just for shits and giggles. This would coalesce into the activist group Anonymous. Anonymous was an international group of primarily internet-savvy millennials who would congregate under the banner of this icon. The mask from the political thriller graphic novel and later movie V for Vendetta. This was in turn inspired by Guy Fawkes from British history. The hacker group would use it as a symbol of anti-authoritarianism. This group's first major target was the Church of Scientology. The Church of Scientology has oftentimes been described as a cult based on emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and a cosmic battle against an ancient alien emperor called Xenu. Seriously, just look it up. It was popular among Hollywood celebrities during the 2000s due to the covert nature of its activities, legal and illegal, as well as the secrecy of its beliefs. However, with the internet, ex-Scientologists could expose the shady practices of the cult, which charges you money to remove evil alien spirits called Thetans. In 2008, 4chan and Encyclopedia Dramatica were used by the hacktivist group Anonymous to organize hacking and trolling against the Church of Scientology under Project Chanology. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. Some of this involved old media, such as prank calling, and some of the trolling also involved new media, namely DDoS attacks against the church's website. DDoSing, for those of you who don't know, stands for denial of service, in which people flood the website's bandwidth, and this usually involves infecting the target with malware. During this time period included the Westboro Baptist Church, which uses homophobia to protest the funerals of fallen American soldiers. Anonymous would also play an important role in Occupy Wall Street during 2011, DDoSing websites related to major banks and the stock exchange as revenge for the 2008 financial crisis. The group Anonymous would also fight against what they saw as fair use violations, defending the now defunct website Mega Upload, and later on, for the first time, congregate in real life under the Million Mask March, hosted on November 5th, which is Guy Fawkes Day in the UK. The event was known as Operation Vendetta. Get it? V for Vendetta? The lines between the online world and the physical world were beginning to overlap more and more, as were the lines between old media and new media. Speaking of overlaps, there was also an overlap between Anonymous and the non-profit group WikiLeaks, founded by Australian hacker Julian Assange. WikiLeaks would publish military logs of various war crimes committed by the US, UK, and Saudi Arabia. Much of this information would be given by whistleblower and former US soldier Bradley Manning. Bradley Manning would end up receiving legal consequences for his actions, but nonetheless would be hailed as a hero. Eventually, Bradley Manning would transition into Chelsea Manning. Julian Assange and other members of WikiLeaks would be seen as heroes in the eyes of many as well. However, their reputation would be hit with accusations of misconduct and a collusion with the Kremlin. Another major whistleblower during this time was Edward Snowden, a civic libertarian who worked for the CIA, Dell, and Booz Allen Hamilton, collecting documents by the National Security Agency. He would eventually leak information about mass surveillance by the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance to journalist Glenn Greenwald. The Five Eyes Alliance was created during the Cold War to organize intelligence between Anglophone nations, the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. To have open, pluralistic liberal democracies have such a vast system of surveillance was a shock to many. Snowden would eventually flee and settle down in Russia, a country with its own pretty terrible track record when it comes to mass surveillance. Some politicians saw Snowden as a danger, but most of the public saw him as a hero. It was very clear that Putin had allowed Snowden to settle in Russia and become a citizen for pragmatic geopolitical reasons rather than any actual principle of online privacy. People who care about privacy and free speech don't tend to have all of their critics get thrown out of windows. Eventually, 4chan and Encyclopedia Dramatica would transition from a platform for assholes with a righteous cause into assholes without a cause, of which I belong to, or worse, assholes with a bad cause. Today, 4chan is more associated with lolicon than hacktivism. If you don't know what lolicon means, just look it up in incognito mode. You don't want it in your search history. I take that back, just don't look at it at all. Ignorance is bliss. Whatever activism does still exist on 4chan was eventually taken over by far-right trolls. Yes, it was these trolls that would turn an obscure webcomic of a cartoon frog called Pepe into a symbol of hate in the eyes of much of the old media. However, some of the lighthearted trolling, parody, and satire didn't vanish, but rather migrated into other websites. Parody writing, for example, would move into the website Unencyclopedia. This deflated potato version of the Wikipedia icon is the symbol of my adolescence. My personal favorite page on Unencyclopedia is the page about Wikipedia. Check it out. Shortly afterwards, in the country which created the digital revolution, a new movement would emerge IRL but organized through online new media, much to the disdain of old media. Back in the US, the 2008 Wall Street crash occurred in the fall of that year in part due to lax banking regulations and a revolving door between the megabanks and the government. The outrage over the Great Recession that this caused had led to mass protests against Wall Street and big finance in general. By 2011, the Wall Street bailout, alongside economic inequality and a lack of concrete action by Congress, many of whom had received campaign contributions from powerful financial institutions, had led many young millennials who suffered the brunt of the Great Recession onto the streets to protest. Occupy Wall Street dominated new media, with massive groups on Facebook, countless tweets, and YouTube news coverage by left-leaning alternative media accounts such as the Young Turks and Democracy Now! Meanwhile, mainstream media ignored them at first. Then, when the protests got very large, they covered the protests, but in a negative light. Russia Today, the state media of the Russian government, had a YouTube channel which latched on to the anti-establishment sentiment, not because they particularly cared about the cause of Occupy Wall Street, but rather because they could use it to sow discord within the United States and other Western nations. The movement eventually fizzled out and the camps were removed. This was as much a product of infighting as it was due to external forces. Subgroups of Occupy Wall Street popped up IRL and online, such as Occupy Patriarchy and Occupy Whiteness. At the beginning of the 2010s, it seemed certain that social media would propel economic justice at the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist. Lo and behold, it would not be economic grievances that would dominate the 2010s, but identity politics centered around race, gender, and sexuality. However, there would be spurts of interest for economic populism, both online and offline, following Bernie Sanders and other social democratic populists. And speaking of race, gender, and sexuality, let's move on to the next chapter. In the next video/section, The Third Awakening 1.0. If you want to learn more about internet social movements, please like, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for the next video. Cheers.